welcome to the Caritas Consciousness Project, and happy to see you all here. Tonight we have a special interview with Bernice Hill, who I'd like to introduce to you. So our theme for tonight is the book, Bernice's latest book, Cosmic Human, Cosmic Intent. So let me tell you a little bit about Bernice Hill, Ph.D., a Jungian Analyst in private practice in Boulder, Colorado for over 35 years. She's a member of the International Association for Analytic Psychology from Zurich, and until retirement, she was a senior training analyst for the Psyche Jung Institute of Colorado. She is the author of 3 books now. Her first book was The Emergence of the Cosmic Psyche, UFOs and ETs from the Perspective of Depth Psychology, that was published in 2010. Her second book was Spiritual Perspectives on Death and Dying, which was published in 2015. And her third book is the one we're doing tonight, Cosmic Human, Cosmic Intent, and that will be our subject for the interview. She was a founding member of Boulder Exoculture, Exopolitics, and Exoconsciousness, a public forum for discussion of our expanding cosmic awareness. So welcome, Bernice. Happy to have you. Thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you, Gloria.
So I want to start by asking you, first of all, what specifically motivated you to write this book?
I think there were 2 things. One, of course, are our times, these particular times. And the second reason would be where I am in my own particular journey. So if I could just parse those out a little bit, I probably don't have to describe very much the sort of stress and angst that come over the television and over the radio about our times. You know, we just really are laboring with an awful lot of fear. And along with that fear, we have this feeling that our institutions are wobbly, you know, whether it's been our, through time, our government institutions, our law and order institutions. There's a lot of wobbliness in our institutions. And then add, of course, that into the pandemic, there's just a lot of physical fear. And of course, what's complicating it is the fact that we don't know what the facts are half the time. There's so much confusion and disinformation and so much contradictory information that it's hard to know what reality is. So the times are really hard. And because they are, they throw us much back on our own psyche, on the strength of our own inner being. And it's particularly hard because this culture that we're in is so extroverted. It's depended so much on these external things to sort of know who we are and where we are, type of thing. And of course, one of the things I was thinking of in writing this book is that Carl Jung, it was actually in 1933, wrote a book, Modern Man in Search of a Soul, where he really said the culture is leaning so far towards materialism that it's doing it at the expense of his inner life and of our own inner life. And in my walk this morning, I was remembering, many of you may know the poem of David White, but he had a poem in which he said, "Don't tell me what your God or gods are. I really want to know if you belong, or do you feel abandoned?" And many people, I think at the moment, feel abandoned because of they haven't yet found the core of the inner being yet, in which they can sort of anchor themselves through all this chaos. So it was certainly that was one of the issues, because I think in the spiritual and psychological literature and experience, there is so much potential for positive and the support of information at this point in time. So that was one of the issues that took me to write it. And the other, of course, is at this stage of the game, being 87, you could sort of think, well, what is my purpose? What is my goal? What sort of form would it take? And I looked at my life and I realized I had three areas in which I was continually exploring. One was the psyche, as you mentioned, Gloria. One was reincarnation. I have at least one bookshelf full of reincarnation books. And then the third one, of course, had to do with cosmic visitors, which has intrigued me for many a time. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about some of the things I read that most inspired me. And one of them was by a Dr. Richard Buck. He was a Canadian doctor. He worked through the 1850s to about 1900s. And he was a man who was very interested in the emerging field of psychiatry at that time. And one night he was coming home after a very pleasant evening, having a lovely supper with friends and talking about ideas he was interested in. And he was driving his horse and buggy through the moonlight in the woods and sort of thing. And all of a sudden, the whole perception of where he was shifted. And he just was overwhelmed with this feeling of love and connectedness to everything that was around him. And he really had a knowing at that time that there was a fundamental order and principle underneath all the chaos that we see in everyday life. So I was really inspired by him. And I was also thinking that one of the most important issues that is in our culture at the moment is our psyche. That's where everything exists at this point in time in terms of the turning point of what we're going to do in the future. And when you start to do something, how certain things arrive at your door. Well, within a few months, an Italian friend had this picture he had painted and gave me permission to use it on my book. And I thought it was so apt because it shows people those people that have really developed their heart, those people that have really developed their mind, those people that have specialized in one or the other, and some that haven't yet reached the brink. And yet overhead, there is such a lighted quality. And I'm not sure what he meant by whether those were spaceships or was that our higher self. I didn't know what he meant by that. But it seemed to me that it landed on my desk with a great appropriateness. So those were the two forces that led me to write this book, Gloria.
I see. You and I talked about there being three overarching themes in the book. And the first one is the prime importance of Psyche's journey. So would you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we're not always aware of our deeper self, or we're not aware of how it has really influenced our life. But if we look back and we trace our life through our own personal history, we can see these points in which clearly the inner self has had a great influence. And that has certainly been my story. I think it was probably when I was in my 50s that I had a great job. I lived in Princeton. I had a lovely little house, blue house with white shutters and a big backyard full of trees and so on. And had a great job at the medical school. They paid me well and did the sort of work that I thought I was enjoying. But then I had a dream that I was on the wrong road. And then in the next few months after that, it kept coming back and coming back. And so that took me off to see a Jungian Analyst in Princeton. And we had to sit down about why was this life that I was living in, that I worked very hard to create, was no longer the right road. So a clear example, from my point of view, of the intervention of the self against anything that I personally, in my everyday life, would have wished. And then it showed up again after 4 or 5 years. I had moved out west. I was in private practice and doing different contracts to support myself. And I decided that I would like to train as a Jungian analyst. And that's not an easy program to get in. Anyway, I applied, and the evening before, I went to the application. The application is pretty heavy. You have to go be interviewed 3 separate committees, 3 people on each committee, and then a larger group of 8 or 10 people, all senior analysts. So it's a little formidable. And so anyway, but the evening before, I did have a dream, and the dream was I was living in a simple house, but in my backyard, Jesus Christ was there, and he was pointing to a small stone wall in the backyard, and there was a poem there, Beneath the Deep, and the poem had to do with accepting death. Essentially, it was Rudyard Kipling's Home from the Sea, like the hunter home from the hills, the sailor home from the sea. And the thing was about the dream was that Christ was very unhappy with me, was very frustrated. So anyway, I went off to my interview the next day, and of course they ask you certain questions. Before I got to the interview in that morning, I had gone around to see a patient. He was quite ill, and when I got there, the hospice nurse was just leaving. So anyway, I chatted with him a little bit, and then he had a weak spell, and his wife and I supported him for a little while, and he just quietly died in our arms.
Oh, wow.
So this is all that happened before I went to my interview. So in the afternoon at my interview, of course, all these professional people said, okay, Bernice, how's your day been so far? And have you had a dream recently? And of course, I shared that information with them, and the doors opened because Jung himself was very interested in death. And I could not have made those experiences up, but they were certainly what arrived at my door. And the thing I had come to really appreciate with Jung, and I'll use his terms this evening, what he thought about the self was composed of both the inner spirit, which is that part of us that longs for the light and wants to keep seeking and growing, as well as the soul, that part of us that guides us out into the harsh world and has all those experiences. So for Jung, the self was both of these elements. For people in esoteric studies, that would be the same as the monad, essentially. And it would sort of be like the monad is as close probably as individually as access we have to the great source, but the monad probably has also a touch of our individual self. So it has our unique qualities to it, but it is our doorway to the great universal mind or the source, whatever words we might use for that. Mm-hmm. So through my practice then, I really had an experience. I was in practice 37 years. I really saw how tough life can be. There is just no doubt we get challenged here. Very few people get through without some really severe emotional crises. But I also saw that it was learning, and that there was something in the psyche that kept unfolding, this learning. And one of the things we learned through more than anything else was our shadow. You know, all those unfortunate things that we have hidden from our closest friends. And, you know, whether it's our greed or our anger or our fear or whatever it is, there's always some elements of there in the story that we have to get to the bottom of. And it's the thing that brings people often in to doing analysis is that something has really stirred up complex, and they need to come in for some exploration in that regard. And then, of course, the big thing in working with the psyche is working with the tension of opposites, because that goes on within us as well as ourselves with friends or family members or other people. There's always a working of the tension of opposites. Mm-hmm. And yet what I saw in the practice was that the psyche itself is a way of getting beyond that. We want to get beyond it when we're working with other people through negotiation or mediation or something else. But how do we get beyond it when the conflict is within ourselves? And I'll give you an example of that, which was I saw a middle-aged woman who her her husband had walked off and left her, a businessman. He had a very attractive secretary and left out one day and didn't say anything further and didn't come back. And so she was one of my early clients. And she was a very conventional woman, a very devoted woman. She'd given so much of her life to this marriage and their children. And so she was devastated. But she brought a dream in which she was in her living room with her golden retriever, but across the street in the neighborhood, in the suburbs, she could see a wolf lurking in the bushes there. So she was very curious about what this dream really meant. So we worked with that over time, worked with it, and eventually she had a dream in which she had moved into a new town. She had her dog with her, but her dog was not a golden retriever, but what do they call these? A German Shepherd, pointed ear dog, black German Shepherd. And when she arrived at what that was in her own understanding, she realized that she had to deal with the amount of rage that she had, and the way that their psyche dealt with it and tried to communicate that was she needed to acknowledge how angry she was, and then the psyche itself put together a symbol, new town, and with a companion dog that was a stronger, more aggressive dog, much more able to represent her own anger, now conscious and willing to be more assertive in her own life. Mm-hmm. So Jung would call that the transcendent function, that above the tension of opposites, our psyche has the capacity to get the higher answer, and an answer that integrates and solves all different aspects of the situation. So those were the aspects in my practice that struck me as really important for us to sort of review now in our looking at our own psyche. But the learning unfolds further, and it drew me personally also into the studying of the ageless wisdom tradition. The ageless wisdom tradition is, it has two basic principles, although it's a very complex and it takes years and years. I only really touched the surface of it. But its basic premise is that there is a common spiritual force, an awareness through all things. And when one opens to that more and more, you just innately are your brother's keeper. And that's sort of the basic of most of our spiritual traditions here. And the ageless wisdom really drew a number of profound thinkers over the years. Like Gandhi went and studied ageless wisdom works, and Rudolf Steiner did that as well.
Didn't Helena Blavatsky actually inspire Gandhi to, so in a sense, rediscover the Hindu tradition and scriptures also?
I didn't know that, Gloria, but it would make sense that that had happened, because she would reaffirm that.
Yeah, because India had been colonized for quite a while, and they had kind of, to a certain extent, left behind their own rich spiritual tradition of Hinduism, and she was a big fan of it. I mean, she just loved it. It inspired her with a lot of her own principles, and so she met him. I remember this from her biography. I don't remember the details, but I believe she met him and said, you should be studying your own tradition.
Wow.
And
so they enriched each other, really.
They enriched each other. Yeah.
Reaching for my glasses here. I just wanted to share one thing that Blavatsky wrote, because, and Blavatsky was followed up by an English woman, very strong teacher called Alice Bailey. That was part of that tradition. But Blavatsky, in looking at the psyche, wrote this: whatever plane of consciousness we may be acting in, both we and the things belonging to that plane are for that time our only realities. As we rise in the scale of development, we perceive that during the stages through which we have passed, we mistook as shadows for realities. And the upward progress of the soul is a series of progressive awakenings, each advance bringing it with it the idea that now at last we have reached reality. So it really talks about how the soul has this, or I would say the self, has this amazing capacity for development. And then Alice Bailey went on to say, when a person first begins increasingly through their soul, their graded light magnetizes all forms of consciousness that are less developed. Their greater nutrition feeds a host of other life forms. Their ability to heal increases. All creatures instantly sense that soul energy and respond. And in their presence, even plants increase in beauty and diversity. So I thought this put that right to the main point.
Yeah.
So the theosophy thing speaks of a series of initiations as the soul becomes more and more expressed through our life and through our body. And with each of these, of course, there is an unfolding also a sense of responsibility. So both Jung and the ageless wisdom tradition are what they call emergent processes. They are emerging. They move towards a goal. There's a flow as things get richer and deeper and clearer and closer to the core of what they're aiming for. So that was the background of my psyche, that exploration that I used for this book. And it led largely, as Gloria was just saying before we started, as in Spiritism, both of those studies led me into looking at reincarnation. Of course, being my age also encouraged me to look at reincarnation. Anyway. And
well, I like what you said about the growing awareness of responsibility, and I can especially relate that right now. I think there are more and more people in our society who are being shaken out of their complacency and feeling a responsibility to help things move in a better direction and to help things evolve. You know,
Absolutely.
our institutions and our
yes,
just so many injustices. And, you know, so I think that more than ever, I know myself personally, I feel more individually, personally responsible
yes,
than ever before, you know,
yeah.
in terms of taking some kind of steps, whatever is within my ability, my power to do, to not just leave it up to our elected officials or, you know, the people who are supposed to be in charge.
I think there's a lot of sign that evening.
Yeah.
One of the things I saw in all this stuff on reincarnation, and there's all this channel material, which people said, well, that's soft evidence. But increasingly over the last few decades, there have been psychologists and psychiatrists and people sort of coming out with really good descriptions and good research. And then we have the wonderful contribution of Claude Swanson this year, where physicists, and scientists are getting involved. This is getting respectable. It's really quite amazing. I wanted just to touch on one thing that moved me in the search through the reincarnation material. And that is that a nun in South Africa, she died about 1965. And let's see if I can find that. I'll just take a quick look at. It's interesting how she, after she passed, she had a very close friend, and they had an agreement that once she passed, once Frances had passed, they would try to get in touch. And the friend was able to write all that down. It's a very well-known book. It's called Testimony to the Light. But Frances speaks about when she woke up after she died, and she said it was like being pulled out of a sea of silver, which I thought was a great description.
Yeah.
She talks about the life review process that happened for her. It not only happened when she first arrived, it happened continuously. There was another life review throughout. So from a different perspective, And this is how she wrote about the first one. She said she was presented with the blueprint of her life. And then she was presented with the second blueprint at the same time. It's the same event. In a way, the blueprints resembled maps with colored places and light and dark paths and a kind of glowing sun for the highlights. First of all, the mind looks at the whole comparison, the two sets of blueprints side by side. There is the first shock, a true humbling of yourself, to find you did so little when you were sure you were right. During this experience, the whole cycle of your life term unfolds before you in a kaleidoscopic series of pictures. It's a crisis. Yours is the judgment. You stand at your own bar of judgment. You make your own decisions. You take your own blame. You are the accused, the jury, and the judge. Yet one learns so much. So amongst all that literature of the past life material, this is one of them that I thoroughly enjoyed. So again, I think there is tremendous relief and hope when people begin to understand that there's a part of us that is eternal. I mean, despite what we go, there truly is gathering evidence of a part of us that is eternal. And it's in times like this that sort of information, I think, is really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So all these things were sort of contributing to my notion about cosmic knowing, Gloria.
Mm-hmm. And so you just described the theme of the cosmic human. And so when you use that term, cosmic human, can you give us a good definition of what you mean by cosmic?
By cosmic?
Mm-hmm.
I think it is moving towards, it is the process of moving towards this type of expansion. A good friend of mine gave me a word the other day, which I thought was very helpful. It's a Buddhist word she called stepping back. Because of our narrow focus and our pointedness and our external directedness,
right.
We are so grounded in the three-dimensional reality.
Yeah.
But when we can take a step back and our horizons broaden and we begin to see a bigger picture and we see many more possibilities, 17 different ways to solve a problem, and we begin to realize that things in light become more and more light, and the hope begins to seep in about things that can be resolved, we ourselves become more lighted, and we begin to connect this, that we begin to open up to the connectedness that I was speaking about with my friend, Dr. Richard Buck, that we begin to access this cosmic connectedness that is the potential. It's innate within all of us.
Right.
So
yeah, and I would say our vibration goes up, our frequency.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yes. Yes.
It's another way of kind of appreciating this evolution that you're talking about, this kind of seeing the bigger picture and not just
That's right.
The world.
Becoming illumination. We see the light.
Yeah. Yeah.
Illumination enters the situation,
Right.
Which is really great. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the third theme was cosmic intent. So can you
Cosmic intent. This book, which I started writing last June, it was very frustrating, and then downloads would happen, and I'd be able to write and so on. But early in the game, the title "Cosmic Human Cosmic Intent" landed, and I was really embarrassed. People would ask me, what's the name of your book you're working on? I would tell them, and they say, well, that is certainly pretty ambitious or pretty invited, So, but it just landed, and then it was a few months later that the cover landed as well, So we are being stimulated by the cosmos. There's no question. I mean, just Gloria, what you had mentioned earlier about the higher frequencies coming in and feeling more responsible and so on. There is this stimulation in frequency, and we know that the Earth even is heating up. I mean, the core of the Earth is heating up. The frequencies are heating up. And what had happened in my practice, of course, over time, is I began to get clients that had reported being visited by ETs, cosmic visitors, having dreams. A lot of people had dreams in that nature. So I started going to workshops, and I think the first workshop I went to, which was in Tucson, it was late at night. I got in, I was taking the van to the hotel, and there was a young man. We were the only people in the van, and chatting a little bit. And then finally I had the courage to say, well, I'm going to a UFO conference. And he said, well, so am I. And he was a pilot, you know, so, okay.
Pilot? He was a pilot, did you say? Did you say he was a pilot?
He was a pilot of a large commercial airline.
Ah.
And had experiences seeing UFOs that the airlines, of course, told him to be quiet about. But that was bringing him there, and he also had personal experiences with contacts. But I think my interest in this whole field started in 1996. I had gone to a conference, a lovely conference in Kansas that was to explore consciousness. That was the nature of it. And I had arrived late at lunch one day, and it's a conference of about 100 people, all seated at tables of 8 all over the place. And since I had arrived late, I could not find a seat, except way off in the corner, there was one table with 7 people on it and an empty seat. So I went over and sat down by 2 burly men. And I realized in conversation that one was a Buddhist monk and the other was a shaman from New Zealand called Mackie. And we had just started to chat when someone rushed into the room and said that a grass fire was bearing down on this very rickety, dry, old camp that we were in, and we were in danger. Wow. And would some of the holy men do something about that? And so the Buddhist monk and Mackie from New Zealand rose, and Mackie said, your lunch is not touched. Can we take it for this ritual? And I said, okay. And so they take it out, and we all pray outside and throw this lunch to the wind, and the wind went somewhere else. Huh. So anyway, it happened that a month after that, I was at a UFO conference in South Dakota, and Mackie was there, and Mackie said, I want you to be part of a circle of 12 women, because my task is the grandmothers, 70 generations of New Zealand grandmothers say that the tremendous period of time is coming. There's a time of great purification coming. And what is one of the most important items in that will be the role of women, that women need to come up and be of equal power with men, bring their own particular branch of power to work with men to bring in the new that is going to come after this tremendous cleansing project. And so I was inspired at that time to actually to take three different pilgrimages of women, one to Peru, one to New Zealand, one to Egypt. And in all cases, we made contact, or we looked for what was the lighted, what were the cosmic visitors in the situation? And cosmic visitors is such a much better word, because there's such a range of entities out there in this great cosmos that we're opening up to. You know, that we have the standard little green men thing, but we have angels, and we have people in bright robes, and we have wise entities that might just arrive as a sphere of light. So that is sort of what was all emerging at that time. So anyway, I began to get a lot of people in my practice, or in my friendships too, who had experiences with cosmic visitors. And I was very impressed by them and with their story. There's no question they've had a tremendous shock. Their whole vision of reality has been shaken, and when they have had contact of that nature. And a lot of people have had contact even as children, and it must be just sort of conscious lights in the room sort of thing. One of the contactees, though, sort of nailed it in terms of the culture. She said, I realized afterwards that we are so ignorant. We are so ignorant. We're so earthbound, and we're so arrogant about being earthbound in that situation. I'd like to just read you a passage from one of the gals that I spent some time with. her name was Susie Hansen, and she had experiences with ETs just really from her early childhood.
Yes, she presented at Caritas one time when her book came out.
That's right. We also had yeah, that's right.
Yes. And I liked her very much.
Yes, a delightful woman.
Her message was very beautiful.
It was.
Yeah.
This was one of the experiences that she had. She was taken on the ship, and her son was also, she had a young son taken on, and she'd see the kids playing with little balls of light and taught how to cooperate with each other in the play sort of thing. And then the adults too had many experiences, and here's one of them. This was being led by a being, other entities joined them. All their forms were shimmering with violent colors. Wait a minute, I started in the wrong place. She writes that these ETs could adjust time and space. At one point, an instructor unfolded this. The room suddenly became infused with a strange bright white light, appearing to extend the walls outwards away from us, creating even a vast space. All the while, his thought voice continued, describing how we were now inside intelligence, or we were inside the vast mind. The walls, the floors, the ceiling of the room, no longer visible, caused me to feel as if I was floating and not able to feel the soft floor underneath my feet. And then there was music. No earthly music, regardless of how majestic or beautiful, could compare to this wave movement of energy transformed into sound. Two of our group were crying, not through sadness, but because their joy was overwhelming. This is foreign to us. We are not a species that feels such intensity of joy. We drag ourselves down. They could not understand our mental and emotional heaviness when we have such beauty around us in our planet. The instructor said that in the future, humans would understand this form of energy, that thought is energy and movement, thought, form, and energy are consciousness, and all can return once again to the pure consciousness of the source. They emphasized that negative thoughts do a lot of harm daily. They do it on a daily basis, and that developing our mental capacities and the need for control and our discretion of these mental capacities is the path of our evolution. So I thought there was tremendous hope in a lot of these messages that we have seen from the contactees. Mm-hmm. It's also sort of what you had said, Gloria, a few minutes ago. There's a tremendous time of fruitfulness. And one of the things I discovered in my research is that at Rice University now, there's a Dr. Jeffrey Capel, who's a very famous chair there, a chair of philosophy and religion. And he's also now sort of moved into looking in terms of philosophy and spirituality into the cosmic visitors. But his main interest is the advance of our consciousness. And so one of the things he wrote about was he was really looking at how our consciousness has become sort of mellow after we've discovered that science and scientists actually do affect experiments. It's become a little more blurred, those lines between the three-dimensional and us. Right. And he writes that the difference between the universe out there and the human mind in here is beginning to get quite fuzzy. Mm-hmm. Now emerging from the natural order of the universe, in other words, through evolution itself, we are becoming the cosmic human. And he describes this shift as, this is the time when the mirror, he's speaking of the mirror of consciousness, turns back on itself. It stops reflecting outside objects and egos and comes to know itself not in the mirror as part of what you're looking at, but as the mirror itself. Mm. So people
what was his name again, Bernice? What was his name?
Jeffrey Kripal, Kripel.
Okay.
And it's Rice University Department of Philosophy and Religion. Mm. Another person that really contributed, and I've learned of him through the cosmic visitors, the ET movement, was this Benito Massaro. Gloria, and I think you have a chart. I was just sort of ecstatic.
Yeah.
I love maps, and so I was really happy to see this map.
I'm going to share my screen and show that chart.
Yeah.
There it is.
So if we look at that chart,
can you see it, Bernice?
Yes.
Okay.
If we start at the far right-hand side, we see that part of our understanding that most of us are considering in our world today, and our three-dimensional world at this far right. There's us in our world. There's our three-dimensional self type of thing. But if you pull back, you get to see the whole realm of possibility that our evolution offers us. It's really our birthright to know that this is all, we are all this. We have this tremendous capacity to open to this. I think, you know, in Jungian and therapy work, we're really at the point of just still person in the world moving towards that little outer circle of higher self and looking for guidance in that first small circle. But then we gradually are growing, and I think this has a lot to do with what's happening with the shift, is moving into that soul, and some moving into this next part of this large circle, the awareness of their own presence, energy type of thing. And what the ageless wisdom people are talking about is that the culture itself is trying to break through and undertake the first initiation, which would mean that the culture itself is moving from the person world into the next larger circle. That would be like the first initiation. But in the book, I go on to describe these different areas of awakening. And the thing that's quite exciting is we will meet people today who are living in what I call presence energy. They're totally being in the now and just really responding to their deeper self and making their choices and whether to enter the action or hold back. There's that type of gradual increasing of awareness that is about us now. So anyway, I only have one diagram in the book, but this is my favorite one. So thank you very much for showing it, Gloria. That's great.
Okay, let me see if I can get back to, all right.
So I just wanted to sort of finish up what I was saying about the cosmic intent is that Theosophy talks about a plan. They talk about from this deepest level of the source or the universal mind, there is generated vibrations and frequencies that truly are good and true and beautiful. And it is an ongoing journey for us to find them. The philosophy of ageless wisdom says that this earth is eventually going to be a sacred planet. I think, Gloria, somewhere along the line, you had mentioned the earth and the planet being an astral planet or a very emotional planet.
Right, right. In Spiritism, it talks about how the earth has been, still is, a planet of expiation, where we learn mostly through pain and suffering, but that with the shift that is coming in, the shift of consciousness, the elevation of consciousness, and the elevation of the frequency of the planet itself, as you point out, it with the Schumann resonance, right? And that we're in a transitionary phase, or we soon will be, where the planet will transition from one of expiation to one of regeneration. Right. And in that case, of course, we will learn through deliberate.
Beautiful.
Yeah, instead of so much pain and suffering.
Yes. The ageless wisdom is that
the transition is our capacity for love.
right.
Okay, so that's, and of course there will be a greater capacity.
Right.
Go ahead.
The ageless wisdom take on it is they describe it in a form of what they call Ray 4, but Ray 4 has a certain type of tasks to be done. And the tasks are to achieve harmony through conflict.
Yes.
So the emotionality here and the chaos here and the having to open to love here are all the ingredients of this struggle to reach harmony through conflict. I mean, that's what this planet apparently is about. This beautiful planet.
Yes.
And the ageless wisdom say that is our journey. As we enter the Aquarian age, it is essentially an age of synthesis. Mm-hmm. So in a way, the transcendent function of Jung, or getting beyond the conflict of A and B and I'm right and you're wrong, to that next level of synthesis is the main point. And we have to sort of undertake it both individually and collectively. It is certainly it's our evolutionary pathway. So
yes, and in our journey of evolution, humanity's evolution, does the ageless wisdom also include a planetary evolution?
Yes, my understanding is that it does. And more than that, the solar, there are planetary evolutions involved, yes. Not just our planet type of
yes.
thing. So they do.
Yes, absolutely. I don't know how it could be otherwise.
Yes, right? If it's a conscious universe, yeah. then it's peopled by consciousnesses in many different shapes and forms, mm-hmm. then but that's part of the arrogance in a way, just to think it belongs to Earth, mm-hmm. So anyway, just to wrap up what I was aiming for with this part about the cosmic intent, it would just seem that our journey is through chaos and heartbreak. I mean, I'm sorry. Those are the challenges. I've seen so much of it in my practice that I just don't know how some people bear what they have had to go through. But people do learn and they do expand in the process. And in that way, they expand in awareness type of thing. And they come more into their being. And they come also more into a commitment to this path. Because there is something about the soul's longing. The soul intuitively feels there are rewards. There are different ways of being that do fill one with a tremendous sense of gratitude and awe and love. And I think that is our destiny, to become cosmic citizens and to join the cosmic community because it's out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when you speak of synthesis, it makes me think of how, there are all these different traditions and paths, right, to the same thing, uh-huh. kind of like all roads leading to Rome. And one of the things that struck me in your book with regard to that was how the description of the contactees after they had contact was so just identical to descriptions of near-death experiencers, right?
That's right.
And as well as mystics and people who have mystical experiences or
right.
profound experiences in meditation. Yes. They come away with this just intense gratitude, strong desire for service, to do service, to change their lives, often change their careers, so we can see that if the outcome is the same, then all of these different experiences must have something in common and must
Yes.
have, right?
Yes.
So there's a synthesis there.
They've
Yeah.
broken through our normative way of looking at things.
Right.
And I think this is the opportunity when things are breaking down so much around us, and we have to figure it out for ourselves more and more. And we have to go back into our inner essence and ask for, okay, what's the best thing to do here?
Yeah.
That is the consequence of these experiences you talk about, whether it's near death or this or.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Kundalini, as Dorothy Walters likes to talk about, Kundalini also, people with strong Kundalini experiences
Right.
often describe the same changes.
Right. Yeah,
Have you ever had a firsthand experience with
No.
no, okay.
I've had dreams. I've had visitation in dreams, but not of that nature. No.
So reading the book, in the first chapter, I wanted to clarify a term that you used that was time immigrants. So can you explain what you meant by that term, what you mean by that term?
Actually, when I wrote that, I really was thinking of using immigration, say from Europe to here, as just as a metaphor for, like, we're in one territory and we need to go and live in another territory culturally. But over the year, I've come to think it also means the second one, because I'm sure you know this, Gloria, talking to the people you talk to. People are immigrating from our more usual notions about waking up to directly waking up in the now, way beyond doing the reincarnational journey or anything. And so they become immigrant in that sense of consciousness itself. So I would say both now would apply. You could apply both.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, you speak of, and you referenced it a few minutes ago, the good, the true, and the beautiful. And I wanted to, as I read that, I was thinking about, the various means in spiral dynamics, which you also talk about a little bit in the book.
Right.
It's clear that at different levels and different ages and cultures, we've had varying definitions of what is good, true, and beautiful, right? That often vary considerably from the definitions of Plato and Aristotle, right, when they spoke of it. And we live and insisting that everything is relative. And how would you define these values of, the good, the true, and the beautiful in terms of the shift that we're moving into? What is the importance of contemplating these values, especially in view of our culture's emphasis on the practical and, being productive and accumulating wealth and being good consumers?
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I was thinking that you were talking about the spiral dynamics, and there's certain sector of the culture is very much into the corporate world. They're business oriented, they're capitalists.
Orange name.
And their notion of the true and the beautiful is very different than what I would have. And the same with people that are in part of the environmental movement, who are part of the green group of mindset. And so, what I was thinking about was that if the shift mainly is the heart opening, becoming more ensouled in how we're living our life, how would that apply to the business industry? How do we see it? And first thing, I think we would see continuing support of women in business, particularly mothers in business, I'd see a lot more flexibility there. I would think particularly after the pandemic, there'd be an emphasis on training programs to enter different businesses type of thing. I don't know quite what the relationship would be to healthcare, but anything, since that shift is really owning up to, I am my brother's keeper, how would business apply that type of thing?
Yeah.
And then if there is a smaller proportion of people that are shifting even into the fifth dimension, where the heart is open, but wisdom is really also a very important part of discretion, how would they deal with that? One of the things I think they do is they'd restore unions. Unions need to be restored to business. So there's somebody on the other side that can move that imbalance beyond where it is at the moment, type of thing. So that was one thought. The other is about the green, the ecological, how the ecological would respond. Mm-hmm. I've got to think that the ecological is the one standby to help us really look at species extinction. If there's any way at all to slow species extinction, I would think that would be a very heartfelt thing to do. If there was any way in which we could look at urban development, and so it's not so clustered in certain parts, so we bring more nature into that, that would be another. Yeah. In terms of the fifth dimension about how to bring wisdom in more into the green movement, it's just whatever way we could find to strengthen attention to climate change. I mean, that is the biggest problem. How better to work with the corporate world with that. So that would be how I would see the shift come in, to try and soften and move along those two positions. So.
Right. And you mentioned something about shadow work helping us find the good, the true, and the beautiful. Can you say something about that?
Yeah.
That's right up my alley.
Yeah.
I love shadow work.
First of all, we can't do without it. Yeah. We can't do this journey without it. Right. It will be in any situation. I'm sure we can find a way to discuss it. I was wondering too about the cultural shadow, that we have. We maybe personally don't directly feel responsible for what happened to the indigenous people in this country, or to Black people more and more. But as these energies move in, there's a term in Ageless Wisdom. It's called the dweller on the threshold. And what it means is accumulation over time. Even things that we have cleaned up, the residue sort of accumulates, whether it's in the individual or the culture. I sort of think of it like a big pile of tar. And the country itself, America, has tremendous shadow issues that it's never openly talked about, so it's an ongoing and most important issue. I really think, Gloria, right on track with that. Yeah. Yeah,
and the more we delay acknowledging and integrating it, the more we project it.
Right.
The more, I remember reading Carl Jung once said, if you want peace in the world, everyone has to own their own shadow.
Yes. Yeah. And with compassion, I think that I want to stress that in the book, because Jung said himself, even the worst crook or the worst person in the world, he has to extend compassion to, because he has those elements in himself, and he's felt them, type of thing. Yeah. They don't heal with that compassion.
I think the shadow has the great gift. The shadow represents what we need for balance, right?
That's right.
What we attract.
That's right. That's sort of an aspect of our humanness.
Yeah.
Sure.
Also, speaking of Carl Jung, you mentioned in the book how duality is expressed through the archetypes. Would you give, I know you gave a couple of examples earlier, can you maybe how he used the archetypes to depict the resolution of these polarities.
Well, the polarities just are. I mean, they persist in their own great element. I mean, if you took even like the mother archetype, there's all different aspects of the good mother, and there's all good, many different aspects of the dark mother type of thing. You know, I'm sure we're a different mother in the morning than we are late at night when we're tired and overworked, you know, type of thing. So we're living with them all the time, and they're part of that ongoing inner work of how can I proceed in the most wise and harmless way possible. Very hard to achieve. I mean, I think one just has to give oneself a lot of leeway in terms of time and space in arriving at a resolution for them. In the culture, if you think of the America as a warrior archetypal culture, I mean, we pride ourselves on being a warrior. That's why we can't get a healthcare system.
Yeah.
And how do we resolve that? I mean, there are people who will fight quite vigorously on either side. Warrior means people have to be independent, look after themselves.
Right. Rugged individualism.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And how
I know. I think of that every time you say, I am my brother's keeper, you know, because that's a polarity right there.
Absolutely.
You know? And we have to see what is, you know, take that which works from both of those polarities and find the way.
It is work. That's the key word.
Because being my brother's keeper could also, in its extreme negative form, could be enabling, right?
Like not my brother financially. Yes. How does one find wisdom?
Right.
In that?
And of course, the rugged individual has its good points, but is also the extreme of, you know, not considering anyone else.
Right.
The extreme of the warrior.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, so switching a little bit back to theosophy. Also, you mentioned the term ascended masters, and I wanted to clarify. You know, it's a term that I've heard a lot, especially in New Age circles, and I wonder where, or is there something that theosophy teaches about, you know, who are these ascended masters? I mean, I think of my own guides for whom I have tremendous gratitude, but I don't think of them as ascended masters. I think of them as wise beings, you know, perhaps between incarnations, you know, who elect to do this service, and don't always have an easy time of it with me, but I don't think of them as ascended masters, but a guide like Dwal Kul, if I'm pronouncing that right, with Alice Bailey, you know, who guided her. He was one of her guides who would the books. Would he be considered an ascended master, or, you know, and what is their function? Do they focus more on humanity as a whole and leave the day-to-day guidance to lesser, often familial spirits, right? Where do they stand in terms of angelic beings?
Right.
Are they angelic beings? What exactly is an ascended master?
Well, a simple question. Thank you, Gloria. Okay. Believe me, I'm not an expert. There's an expert on this panel. She might be called upon at any moment. But anyway, as my understanding is that particularly the ones that visited Blavatsky and Alice Bailey had all been incarnated many, many lifetimes.
Yes.
And so the ascended is that to pay homage to all the work they had done personally. Mm-hmm. And that they are gathered in a particular gathering called the hierarchy, and are given the task of how do you help bring humanity along in a way that they can be more aligned with those fundamental values that exist within. It's sort of like the great orchestra of the universe. There are some very fine melodies, and there are some very fundamental values, and there is a truth in those values, and we only find them the hard way. But when we find them, they're very, what the consequence is, when Christ said, I've come to give you life and to give you in a more abundance, he was actually talking about a state of being that was very expansive and rewarding. So as I understand it, the ascended masters are tasked, they have different separate tasks, different types of, and serve Shambhala, which is a larger, more parent organization of lighted beings. And I don't know whether all in Shambhala were incarnated or not. I don't know that.
Okay. Your voice cut out for a moment. Could you repeat the last couple of sentences that you said?
That the hierarchy of ascended masters, ascended beings, are sort of the working arm of Shambhala, which is the sort of think tank level or the great spirit level. Or how do we? Obviously, there was some impulse or will to bring good into the world and to have it manifest, and truth to be found, and beauty to be explored. And so there's organizations that are here to help support that. And then they step down the tasks to do that.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So in chapter 4, you talk a lot about contactees, right? The people who have contact with extraterrestrials. And I was wondering, do they report their communications to be primarily telepathic? Or do they talk about that at all?
My understanding is it's telepathic.
Yeah, that would make sense to me.
I think, I guess the story that goes with that, another one of these things, you don't know why the self attach certain things together. But when I was newly married, my husband and I moved to Canada again. He was working there, and I looked for a job, and the one job I could find was with the Department of Defense. And they assigned me to a special project of exploring what happened to cells in our body when we had been exposed to atomic radiation. And it was not a pretty picture. 40 years later, in my little living room, I was sitting elbow to elbow with a captain, Robert Salas, he was a military man in charge of 10 of the missile sites in Montana when an extraterrestrial, a UFO appeared over the door, over above the missile. The men were all down in the room underneath the missile where the instruments were. And Robert Salas, he didn't report this. He told me that night, he said, I've never had that experience, but I literally heard this voice in my head say, we are going to shut you down. Telepathic message. 10 missiles were shut down for 2 days. It was, but he said it was a very strange experience. He didn't realize he could receive telepathic messages. But I would say yes. Anybody I've talked to, that's worked. That's the medium. That is the medium. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. I believe I saw a lecture of his. Did he give a lecture in Boulder at one point? Quite a few years ago. Yeah, I attended the lecture.
Yes.
Yeah, And he said that it wasn't just his base, missile base, that was affected that way, but other ones across the Midwest, wherever they have them, because they're all underground. And they also reported UFO hovering above and all the missiles being turned off.
Yeah, the visitors really want us to know that it's dangerous, that as we understand more and more, that frequencies and energies and the quality of energies is what we're learning more about. We're just on the threshold of that. When we started playing around with nuclear weapons and nuclear bombs, we were changing great fields of energy and frequencies throughout the universe, not just our local neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And that is not a brotherly thing to do.
No, it isn't. It isn't. And that is where we also, I mean, I think you mentioned this in your book, that those intelligences from, higher planets, higher developed planets, typically have kind of a hands-off policy in terms of interfering with, our what goes on this planet. But when we set off the atomic bomb, Psyche, that they were they felt that they had to take more of an interest in what we were doing. Is that?
That's correct. I mean, there is that prime directive in a way that they can't do our evolution for us. They can help us, but they can't become more mature. They can't stimulate. They can't make those steps. They can provide the information and some of the energy, but we have to do that. Yeah. And we have to do that realizing that we now have power and technological advancements like pulse beams and so on. It's like we've got all the orchestra instruments and we play them loudly, but we don't know the harmony that really belongs and is appropriate. And so we are a danger to others and ourselves in the energy universe.
Yes, especially when we set off nuclear explosions.
Exactly.
We're affecting the whole solar system and beyond, maybe, in a sense. Yeah.
Because energies are very fine. I think of what Claude Swanson was talking about, the very fineness of torsion light energy.
Subtle
intuition and carries our vehicle to higher spiritual knowing. We blow things up before we know what we've done.
Yeah. It's the problem, one problem as I see it, is that we've developed this high level of technology, but we don't always have, collectively speaking, we don't always have, the emotional maturity, the spiritual, the moral maturity to use it wisely. We use it destructively and even self-destructively at times. And I often tell my students, my spiritist students, it's no different with our inner technology. We also have to have a foundation before, we start developing these faculties. Like you mentioned, multidimensional awareness. And it sounds like you're referring to clairvoyance. Is that right, when you use that term? Like a mediumistic...
I don't know that I use it. People as they're becoming more...
Maybe you were quoting something. I think it was on page 83.
I think Helen Blavatsky said that as people open up more and more to the fourth and fifth dimension, they will become more and more clairvoyant.
Yes. Yeah.
That's like one of the faculties that will come with a greater sensitivity.
Right. And yet there are people who have quite a strong, strongly developed faculty of mediumship, who are not necessarily highly evolved in other ways, and so
Right.
they misuse it.
Yes.
And that's what I was referring to, that we have to have that foundation.
Right.
Um,
The shadow will catch them, Gloria.
yeah, definitely. Yeah. The paragraph I was referring to is in, it just says multidimensional awareness opens the capacity to see, feel, and intuitively communicate with multidimensional intelligent beings. It also opens the door to understanding that the larger, more subtle and conscious cosmos plays with the light and the dark, as above, so below. Yeah. And I like the term multidimensional intelligent beings because that could include, on the one hand, extraterrestrials, on the other hand, spirits. I think there's a lot of overlap when it comes to these things, because at least in the spiritist literature talks about how most of us have already lived on other planets.
Right.
We graduate to whatever planetary frequency we are ready for, right?
Right.
And even though Earth is still one of the lower ones, it's not at the bottom.
Yes.
And it talks about, so there are spirits who are guides from other planets also.
Right.
So whether it's an extraterrestrial, visiting in a spaceship, or whether it's a guiding spirit coming to us in a dream or in meditation, there's a lot of overlap there, except that what I found, I remember being at a lecture, I can't think of the name of the presenter. It was in Boulder, and a fairly well-known one in the area, and he was giving a lecture in the UU church, I believe. This was quite a few years ago. And he actually showed us videos of what he said were extraterrestrials that he had seen. And as I watched this, and I saw the videos, they were very human looking. I thought to myself, he's a medium and he's seeing spirits, rather than, not that I would discard the possibility that he could have had contact with extraterrestrials, but the things that he was showing us, it reminded me more of spirit contact, and Claude Swanson was there that evening too. And when we were in the intermission, I said to Claude, I have a feeling that a lot of what he's seeing, he doesn't realize he's a medium. I have a feeling that a lot of what he's seeing is actually spirits rather than bees. And Claude said, yeah, I think tell him that.
Yeah.
and,
Uh-huh.
and I thought, well, isn't that funny that, on the one hand you have, people who talk about mediumship and spirits, and on the other hand, you have people who talk about UFOs and ETs, and his comment told me that he would be offended if I said, I think what you saw was a spirit, and yet, so many of these contacts, I think, are on more of a spiritual plane, where it's astral projection, these abductions, I think, it would make much more sense if they were abducting the astral body, to see the spaceship or whatever, or communicate with that rather than the physical body.
I think we're just exploring.
Yeah.
I think we're trying to sort it out. I think we're on a threshold,
a
very powerful threshold. And, maybe if we all come back in 2 generations from now, they'll have universities that we can go and sort out the incarnate spirit from the actual true cosmic visitor. I would look forward to those days. I would like more education in that area.
Yeah, and synthesis, because...
And synthesis, exactly. Key word. We're headed for synthesis. We just have to get there.
Right. Um, you also, I don't know if this is on the same page. Oh, yeah. So just after that paragraph, you said, we will need to awaken. There are shadows. And was there something specific that you meant by there are shadows?
Um,
Or,
it's such a topic, Gloria, that you're saying, is there a potato? There are 52 varieties of potatoes, and there are many, many, many fine books on the shadows that go with this whole opening up of the universe. The general feeling is that most of our visitors are very positive, but there's a small percentage that do not, they have their own agenda and their own intention in mind. And that's a whole field. There are 52 potatoes you could educate yourself in that regard. So I just want to point to that, but not get into it, because
it's important.
Good news
is
what that. Important news is, in a way.
Right. I think it's important to know that, because, like in Spiritism, we are warned that not every spirit is necessarily friendly and necessarily evolved.
Yes.
There are spirits who want to do a lot of mischief and, hold us back in ways, and we have to have that discernment.
Right.
And how do we know if a spirit is evolved or not? Well, what do they say, right? What are they saying?
Right.
And, so it's important for us to have that discernment.
That's right.
Okay, so on also in that 4th chapter, you refer to our accidental opening of the space-time continuum. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Have we got 4 minutes left on the program? Is that
No, we have
to space-time continuum, as if I knew anything about it other than quoting somebody from a book. So again, we do know that there are experiments that have been done that can shift physical objects from one space to another, from one time, place to another. We know that our quiet government has been shifting people all over in terms of time continuums, and have the technology to do that. That particular phrase, though, I think, again, was trying to point to the universe as this huge symphony of great and beautiful music. And it's all in energy states and frequencies, and each of these has a quality and an organization. And what we've done is we've bungled into blowing shards out through very fine webs of matter, very fine webs of organized light, that we have no idea that we're doing this, because we're new on the block and we're clumsy. But what that continuum is, you need to go to the University of the Future for that.
It was under Ricardo Gonzalez, that section by Ricardo Gonzalez.
Oh, good, yes.
And evidently he's talking about a race called the Apunians, if I'm saying that right. And he says the Apunians say that our dangerous nuclear explosions in the 40s and our accidental opening of the space-time continuum sent a signal of concern throughout the cosmos.
Yeah, it's sort of like we're blowing holes in the spider webs of energy systems.
Yeah.
Okay. Unknowingly.
Right. And also you talk about Stephen Greer, Dr. Stephen Greer. And I was wondering, I've certainly heard about him, and I've read different things about him. I haven't read any of his books. He's got some books out, right? So I'm kind of ignorant when it comes to some of these things. Does his information about in his books, yeah, Disclosure and Hidden Truth, Forbidden Knowledge, it says he has shown us how a small elite group within corporations and the military have suppressed knowledge of the extraterrestrial visitors and the technology they have brought. Does he have sources inside the military and inside the corporate world that he
Yeah.
is
He has tremendous contacts and has accumulated tremendous information from hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of whistleblowers. I mean,
okay.
he is a classic researcher, and those books, I mean, the first book is that thick with information, and his key point is wake up, people. You need people who are in their soul and in their spiritual growing need to get a hold of. It's not this new technology is going to go away, not that the AI is going to go away. How to make good use of it for a good purpose. That is our challenge.
Yeah, that foundation again, right?
Yeah, right.
And it's in the Course in Miracles, which we also teach at Caritas, describes it as the shift from fear to love.
Right.
That is, or the shift from here to here, which one author said it's the longest journey that you ever take, is the journey from the head to the heart. Right? Well, thank you very much, Bernice,
thank you, Gloria,
for joining us this evening and answering all these difficult questions. We're all trying to answer.
Yeah. Thank you for coming, everybody. I do appreciate that.
Yes, thank you for joining. And this will be recorded, so I think there were a few people who were not able to attend this evening, but they were registered, so they will receive the recording also. Okay, thank you again, Bernice, and many blessings to you and your work.